Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris back for another episode. This week we go back 20 years to celebrate an anniversary of sorts. Not just the first Polish band that we've covered on the show, but we go back to Riverside's debut album, Out of Myself, which has been in rotation for a lot of prog fans for the better part of 20 years now. But before we talk Riverside, Chris, my friend, how are you doing?
Very good. We have been very busy talking about albums, interviewing people. I feel like feels like the back during the pandemic when we were doing interviews left and right because everybody had more free time, it seems. But we got to talk to Jeff and Van from Nevermore, which was great, and then we got to speak to the guys from No Spoon, which was also great. And so now we get back to talking about a full album, one that I did not know super well going into this week. So this was kind of a nice, something new that's old, as it often is for me. But this was cool. I thought, and I mentioned this last week, but I thought this was cool because it made for an interesting bookend, considering that this was their first album and their most recent album came out earlier this year. And I enjoyed their most recent album quite a bit. I expect it to be on my my top 50 list at the end of the year. At least I think it'll be. So it's kind of cool to kind of bookend the year with the Riverside's first album when I was starting the year listening to Riverside's newest album.
What is old is new, and what is new is old. But before we get there, I just want to mention just a pair of albums that I kind of listened to this week, which, kind of struck a chord with me. The first is a band out of, I believe, New Jersey called Everdawn. This is their, I believe, second release. It came out earlier this month. The band's CD is called Venera, Venera. I don't know that it's anything you haven't heard before, but if you're a fan of symphonic metal, you could definitely get some real enjoyment out of this. It was released on Frontiers, so you get a little sense of what that's going to be just because of the record label. But this is a little less AOR-ish and a little more epica without growls, I guess would be a way to describe it. A little less technical, but certainly straightforward enough that I think people can gravitate towards this. And the singer kind of reminds me of a young Tarja in many ways. So if you're into that operatic style, definitely worth checking out. The other thing I wanted to mention, which kind of caught me off guard, it was a band that I forgot about in many ways. The band is called Flames of Fire. The album is called Our Blessed Hope. And for those that may or may not be familiar, Flames of Fire is basically one of the many side projects by a singer you may know by the name of Christian Lillgren out of Sweden, I believe. He is the singer for bands such as 7 Days, Golden Resurrection, and probably most notably Narnia, a band that I've been listening to throughout the years. Flames of Fire is typical, I guess we'll call it Christian-inspired prog metal. It is very thick on the imagery, and the religious influences are definitely plentiful. But if you're into that style, or if you just like good power metal, you could probably do a lot worse than this one as well. I've always loved his vocals, so I make a point to check out everything the guy is on. And this was a pretty good release. I think you definitely enjoy it as well, just knowing your enjoyment for just clean, straight up power metal.
Yeah. I kind of was very late to the Narnia party. I really enjoyed their new album that came out last year. I believe it was on my list, or was it this year? I can't remember. No, I think it was last year. But either way, really enjoyed. Oh wait, no, it was this year. Yeah, it came out March this year. Ghost Town. I think that will probably be on my list as well. I forgot about it because I haven't gone back to it yet, but I will. But I was a big fan of that album. I also really enjoyed the Golden Resurrection stuff because it had Tommy Johansson, his guitar work with Christian's vocals, which I thought made a very cool pairing. I think I had a song from Flames of Fire from last year that I believe you had put on a playlist. So I had heard at least one song from them, but I kind of forgot that there was a third a third project that he was on. So that's cool, and I'd like to hear that Everdawn as well that you mentioned. It sounds like something I would enjoy as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that again, I don't know that they're breaking any barriers here or doing something that's so off the beaten path that it's like, whoa, this is new. But it's one of those things that was just well done and an enjoyable listen. I don't know that I'm going to go back to it repeatedly, but I certainly enjoyed it. And actually, if memory serves, I think their debut was in my top 50 of the year it came out. So I kind of had some expectations for this, and it certainly didn't disappoint. Just both are good listens, but let's get to the task at hand, shall we? What's most interesting, I think, about this Riverside release, and for those that don't know, this is a Polish progressive metal band that obviously formed some 20 years ago now. What was always interesting to me is that if you go on the internet, the album, a lot of people say, came out in September of 2004. And I think the misconception there is that is when it got wider distribution through Ken Golden and his Laser's Edge record label. So that is probably when I first heard the album, but in reality, or Reality Dream as the case may be, the album actually came out in December 2003, and it was actually December 15th, which I think it was actually released for public consumption, albeit on a limited basis. But I wanted to kind of celebrate the anniversary of the original pressing and the original release. And also it's a band that we haven't really talked about at all on the podcast, but for maybe, the or surrounding the new album when it came out. I know that you were familiar with some of the songs on this. I will kick things off by asking you how familiar you were with the rest of the discography and short of the new album. Was this kind of a band that you were like, have you been following for a while, or is this kind of a new jam for you?
I've been following them for a while, but it's kind of like on the greatest hits kind of level. Like I've always paid attention to the singles as they came out and whatever tracks they were kind of playing live at times that I was planning on seeing them, which I guess probably would have just been at Prague Power. But I think that their newest album, ID Entity, that came out earlier this year, it was probably the first time I really just repeatedly listened. You know what? I'm going to take that back, actually, because I did also listen to Love, Fear, and the Time Machine quite a bit when it came out, which I really liked. And that was right before they were set to play Prague Power. It came out I think literally days before that festival. And I remember that song, Lost, Why Should I Be Frightened by a Hat, which I thought was actually kind of apt considering how you're dressed currently. But I just remember hearing that song and thinking, holy shit, like this band's got some really good stuff. So after I returned from Prague Power, I remember really digging into this album and liking it quite a bit. And had I been doing a top 50 list at the end of the year back in 2015, there's probably a solid chance that this would have been on it. But when it comes to the previous releases, such as Out of Myself and Second Life Syndrome and Voices in My Head and Rapid Eye Movement, Reality Dream, so on and so forth, it's always just been, random songs here and there, like, O2 Panic Room and Acronym Love and, what else? That ilk, for the most part. Reality Dream 3, which is the third part of the first two parts we'll talk about on this album, but that kind of series continues on throughout their discography. I don't know. I guess they didn't do a Reality Dream 4. I guess they're up to 3 so far, I think. But anyway,
that's right.
So it's been a very cursory, following. But I think going forward, after their latest album impressed me, I'll probably continue to to really listen to their stuff as it's released. But it's really interesting because it's not something that you would probably think I would resonate with, but I actually like it quite a bit. The kind of mix of like the kind of atmospheric vibe with the prog rock and some of the metal elements, I think it makes for a really interesting combination of sounds. And it's cool because like I mentioned earlier, I've the most Riverside I've ever listened to in my life has been in 2023, and it's been listening to their first album and their last album 20 years apart. And so it's interesting to see like how the band has evolved, only without any of like the stuff in between to kind of fill in the gap. But yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I'm glad that you chose this because it's just cool to kind of go back and listen to the beginnings of this band. And you should get onto Wikipedia and edit their release date for accuracy's sake.
I was thinking of it, to be honest with you. The thought did cross my mind. What I'll say is this: I remember when this album came out, and I remember how it got just kind of rave reviews in the prog community. And I bought it as soon as I was able to back in 2004. I didn't have the original pressing, but I did have the Laser's Edge release of it, 9 months after it was actually out. I bought it right away. And if memory serves, I actually think I bought it at Prog Power, which I'll speak about them and their appearances there a little bit later. But I remember immediately thinking to myself, I've never heard anything like this. And at the time, I was not a huge fan of bands like Anathema. I had been listening to, or at least just started getting into Green Carnation, which is another band that this group kind of reminds me of, at least in spots. But I remember thinking to myself, this is completely different than the prog I was used to. This does not sound like Dream Theater, but it was certainly prog rock, prog metal, whatever you want to call it. And I was just enamored by some of the things they were doing on this disc, which I'll certainly get to. Looking ahead, I remember when the second album came out, people were just going batshit crazy for Second Life Syndrome, which came out all but a year later, or I guess 2 years later in 2005. And that album never grabbed me quite the way this one did. I liked it, and it certainly had some high spots, but I didn't love the whole thing. And then the band really went in a different direction in 2007 with Rapid Eye Movement. And since then, I've listened to all the releases, but I haven't enjoyed them quite like I did the first one. And I kind of just soured on them a little bit. I would go see them live if I could, but I wouldn't go out of my way to do it. And ultimately, it was just like I'd listen and then I would kind of just move on to the next thing. Although I did spend quite a bit of time with the new release, much like yourself. But it's interesting because I haven't visited this album in a long time, as I kind of fell out of favor with the band and what they were doing. And I don't know why, because as I went back to it, it's actually better than I remember it. But I'm almost curious to go back to some of these other albums, the meat in between the bun, if you will, and just kind of revisit them. So I started listening to Second Life Syndrome at work today. And then I got distracted and I had to turn it off. But I made every attempt to really go back and listen to some of this stuff. And I have no doubt that at some point in the future, we'll cover another album or two from theirs, just because I feel like it would make for an interesting discussion, if for no other reason than just to talk about the evolution of this band. One thing I think you can certainly say is they have not remained static.
I think that's fair. I mean, like I'd mentioned, like I've basically took like a 20-year, shot into the future from this album to the newest album, and there's definitely similarities, but the band definitely has evolved quite a bit over time. And I agree with you; it would be interesting to talk about some of the stuff that kind of fell in between.
Yeah, I think that would be. I think that would be a really interesting exercise, and I'm kind of curious. You had alluded to this earlier, but you were saying how you were familiar with parts of this album. As you go back to it, about how much of it did you recognize? I mean, it's not the longest album in the world, but it is meaty, and the construction of it is rather fascinating. It's only 9 tracks, but it clocks in at over 53 minutes. So there's some meat on the bone, but it's not like this is a 18 different cuts. Or, there's not anything like that.
Yeah, I believe in my prep for Prog Power, I believe they played in 2015 that was my first time seeing them. Their first time playing Prague Power was 2008, which happened to be the year before I started going back to Prague Power. But I did get to see them in 2015 when they made their second appearance. So in my prep for that, I had listened to The Same River, Loose Heart, and The Curtain Falls. The album in general sounded vaguely familiar. Like, it didn't feel like something I had never listened to before, but I definitely didn't know it well. And I feel like listening to it a bunch of times, I feel a lot more comfortable talking about it and just how I feel about it. Although I don't know that, I don't know that anything really, really stuck out. I'm a little bit unsure, like, what I would call my song of the week at this point.
Interesting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, but at the same time, like, I felt like it was kind of mostly in the same vein. Maybe I could have given it one more listen, but I think I kind of got the gist of it. And as I go back and listen to each song, I think things will kind of ring out to me as obvious things. I mean, I think that the first track especially is just particularly much longer than any of the other songs on the album. So I think that one in particular has kind of a distinct flavor to it just because of its length. And I feel like it's like one of those songs that really builds. And I don't even think there's any lyrics until well past halfway through the song. But to answer your question, I was vaguely familiar with the album on a whole. I knew a couple of songs fairly well, but yeah, this was definitely definitely just kind of refreshing this whole album back into my head. I'm trying to remember if I even had listened to it right when it first came out. And I mean, at the time, my tastes probably wouldn't have gravitated towards something like this. So I might have listened to it once and then moved on. So yeah, it's good to come back. I definitely remember you telling me about this band in the early days. And I think them playing at Prague Power just put them on my radar in particular. To me, if a band is asked to play Prague Power and I'm not that familiar with them, I have to assume that they're at least pretty decent. Consider if Glenn Harveston wants them to play at his festival. And they were billed about halfway up the bill their first time playing. It wasn't like they, got lumped into an opening spot and it was kind of like, impress me and then maybe you can play deeper in, a few years later. They seem to have earned a decent spot right off the bat. So, that's kind of my brief history with this album.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually missed Prague Power that year that they played the first time. So just to kind of get into the story a little bit, I actually saw them for a one-off show. I don't know if they toured around it or whatever, but they were playing a show at the Crossroads Theater in New Brunswick, New Jersey, about 2 weeks before Prague Power. So it must have been part of a little tour that they did leading up to the show down south. And I remember going out of my way to go see the show because this was kind of the height of my fandom. It was right after the third album had come out, and I hadn't really formulated many opinions on them, but I knew that they were going to play stuff off the first two, and I certainly enjoyed both of those efforts. And they just tore up this little theater. It was either on or right near the campus of Rutgers University, and it was quite a trek. I think it took us about an hour and 45 minutes or an hour and a half to get there, but it was totally worth it. Great show. I remember the setting. It was this intimate little theater with kind of stadium seats, almost in the half round, if you will, kind of like Prague Power, but with no place to sit on the floor. You just kind of sat around this stage that was at the bottom of a pit, if you will. But it was a really, really interesting show. And then they would obviously come back, and they've done multiple U.S. tours since then. Actually, after this week, I'm almost itching to see them again because it's been a while for me.
Nice. How was the attendance at that show you went to?
It was more crowded than I thought, but to say that there was no seats available was definitely an overstatement. But I kind of was expecting like 8 people to show up, and there was, I couldn't tell you the exact attendance, but there was definitely at least 100 or so people in the room. They, it was a nice showing given what it was. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. I remember that particular day like it was yesterday for an odd reason. We saw the show, and then Ken Golden happened to be there because obviously he had his affiliation with the band. And that was the day that I remember picking up Seventh Wonder's Mercy Falls. And so we listened to it on the way home from the show. And I was enamored by that CD after the first listen. I was like, holy shit, this is so much better than all the stuff that the band had done prior to. Not that the music leading up to that album wasn't good, but I remember that album just being like, this is one of the catchiest things I've heard in a long time. And so that all happened that same day. Sometimes things just stick out, and this was one of them because I remember it so well.
I mean, that's a memorable album to say the least, so it makes a lot of sense. By the way, check it out in the archives. We did a full episode on it. But yeah, I'm looking at this Prog Power lineup, and man, I didn't even realize Riverside was the second to last band that played on Friday night before Amorphous, who is returning to the fest next year for the first time since 2008. So yeah, I think they were actually billed lower in 2015 when they came back because they played before Royal Hunt and Angra, who played Paradox and Holy Land. Boy, that was a hell of a day. Now that I'm looking back on it, Helker, Unleash the Archers, Dragonland, Riverside, and then Paradox and Holy Land. That was one day.
It's a day I wouldn't mind going back to as well.
Yeah, and then the day before we had Native Construct, Soto's solo set, Voyager doing a set list chosen by the fans, and then Anathema and the final live Falconer show. So that was, considering that was a lineup that was ravaged by cancellations and visa issues, boy, it worked out pretty damn well at the end of the day. I remember just really, from a musical standpoint, really, really enjoying that year's lineup quite a bit. And there were so many bands that made their way in and out of that lineup. But it worked out. It was great. God, didn't we find out literally that weekend that there were like bands that got held up at the airport over in Europe? And I think
Dynasty was supposed to play all of their album, and which was, by the way, another album we have not talked about on this episode, Renatus or Renatus, however you'd like to say it. That album is a special album as well. And they were supposed to play, I think, the whole thing, and half the band didn't make it, and so Dragonland decided to do to pinch hit and basically do double duty that weekend. Which
was great because they actually had songs that they didn't play on their first set that they played on Thursday night that they got to play on Saturday, which was cool. And I also remember Hybria was supposed to open on Friday and also do like a pretty massive U.S. tour. I want to say it was something like 30 or maybe 40 dates. I don't know. Maybe that's exaggerating. I just remember it was a pretty huge U.S. tour, and they had a problem with getting a visa they had to cancel the entire tour. And that was kind of at the last minute as well. I think Soto was a replacement for a band that didn't end up playing. It might have been Morgana Le Fay, if memory serves. I'm not 100% sure on that.
Yeah.
So Unleash the Archers was a fill-in. I forgot for who they filled in for. So yeah, it was a interesting year to go on a little bit of a sidebar there. But boy, that was a blast. DC Cooper coming out and performing with Voyager, and DC Cooper coming out again with Soto and playing with Angra and Fabio. Just a lot of cool stuff.
I forgot about that. What did they play?
I don't remember. It was definitely a cover of some kind.
That's great.
The three of them on vocals. It was after they played all Holy Land. They did some other tracks as well. So yeah, that was just it was a heck of a weekend, man. That was a blast.
Oh, you know what it was? It was the Kinks cover. I think they did "You Really Got Me." It was like kind of how they ended the set, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, good times. A little bit of a tangent there, but sometimes we take a trip down memory lane. I guess I'll ask a question that I often ask, although not always. Having gone back to this and now kind of digesting it for the for the first time, or at least the first time in a while. Was it everything you expected and more, or were you saying to yourself, I kind of like the newer material better because I think it's a little more straightforward? It's still proggy, but it's a little more straightforward in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I like the newer material a bit better. I always kind of harp on melodies, and I feel like their newer stuff is a little bit more melodic. But at the same time, it really wasn't. Nothing came across as unexpected to me. This was pretty much what I expected it to be. Maybe a little bit more atmospheric than I kind of was remembering. Especially that first 12-minute song, "The Same River," is it's like this very, very, very chill, atmospheric. It's something that I was surprised that I liked because it's really almost unassuming in a lot of ways, but it's cool. It's a cool track. I really, really like Marius Duda's vocals. I think he has a really unique vocal style, and I find that probably pushes the band or my enjoyment of the band higher than maybe it would be if the singer wasn't somebody I liked. Yeah, it's just it. I don't even know that, at least on this track, that you would even call it a metal song. It's more of just an atmospheric, like prog rock kind of tune. But I like it. It's good. It's maybe a little bit on the long side, like that maybe doesn't need to be, but I feel like it was done that way on purpose. It was meant to kind of build and build and build, and then it just kind of chills out again towards the end. And it's a lot of instruments. Like, there's not really a ton of vocals on this track, but it's a cool way to open things up. What were your thoughts on this first track?
In many ways, it's almost like an extended, and when I mean extended, I mean a 12-minute extended intro, which is kind of cool. I mean, I know it's not designed that way, but the way the song kind of builds over that 12 minutes is fascinating. For the first 6.5 minutes, it's kind of like Anathema in the way that their songs kind of build and progress over time. I think of a lot of the tracks on Weather Systems in that vein, where it starts off with either an acoustic guitar or possibly a keyboard, and then it just kind of, the instruments kind of blend in and start building on one another. But you mix that with some of the riffs that Green Carnation was putting out around the same time and even a few years prior. That's the first 6.5 minutes of this track. And then eventually, all of a sudden, as the atmosphere continues to build, then finally the vocals kick in. And it's interesting that you like Marius Duda's vocals. I don't think anyone would say he's the best vocalist in the world, or if he is, he doesn't really show off with this band. It's not like you really see the extent of his pipes, but at the same time, it fits the music so well that you almost you're not looking for more. He's just like the perfect complement to what this music is. But when the song gets going, it really is kind of haunting in a way. And I love the use of the cymbals as it really starts to pick up the like just the way that the drummer uses the cymbals. I think it's a phenomenal kind of approach. And then by the end of the song, the guitar solo is very reminiscent of Pain of Salvation to me, kind of the way this song goes out. I'm a big fan of this track, and I'd be remiss not to mention the band, because we haven't really talked about them, but it's Marius Duda on vocals and bass. He also plays a lot of the acoustic guitar parts. Peter Grzinski on the rest of the guitars, both lead and rhythm. Jacek Melnicki on keyboards, and Piotr Kozaraki, forgive my Polish there, on the rest of this album. Just four guys, and it's a bit sad because the world lost Peter Grzinski just too soon, and I remember that being just a real shock to the metal world and the progressive metal world.
It was just the year after we'd seen them play at Prague Power too, in 2016. So I remember there being like kind of a question as to whether the band was going to continue on without him, and they brought in
Maciej Miller.
Yeah. He kind of was started out as like a hired hand live, and I think that they brought him on full time later on, and the band's still out there, still doing their thing. As I mentioned, they released an album earlier this year, but Yeah, that's the lineup. I was really impressed when I saw them live at how much sound they produced with just four guys on stage. It was because they have a really rich live sound, and it was impressive to me. I remember like looking like, are there only four guys? Because there's a prominent keyboard player and keyboards parts in here. So you had the singer is playing the bass, as you said, and then the drummer, the guitarist, and the keyboard player, and the rich sound that they produced with just those four guys. That was really what impressed me more than anything about seeing them live. I was like, wow, this is quite a sound from coming out of four guys.
Yeah, it's very rich, and it comes off well live, especially with the backing vocals that they use, which are not piped in. They just use backing vocals very well, and they have a very clean sound, even with all the atmospheric stuff. The mix has always been good when I've seen them, and to be honest with you, the mix on this album is quite good. I think that for us, again, we're talking about debut albums. We did it with No Spoon, last week. This is a really rich sounding album for all that's going on, because there's so many layers to this music. I think this first track is a perfect example, but you can really hear it on every track, including the next one, Out of Myself. But there's a lot of layers to this, and somehow they're able to pull it off live and not be an absolute train wreck. But the album, this album, mixed very, very well, in my opinion. And I can appreciate why the bass is so high in the mix, but it's also a very prominent instrument. Like, there's a lot of songs where the bass kind of just carries the tune. And I think Out of Myself, the title track, is a perfect example of this. The way this song starts with this really like great bass line, and then this spooky keyboards behind it, almost like, something from outer space or something like that. It's a bit of a slow build, but again, it takes off exceptionally well. I think this one's a little more accessible, and it's kind of has a more traditional song structure to it. If I was recommending a track to a listener, I'd probably go with this one as opposed to the first song, for obvious reasons. But it actually gets pretty heavy towards the end, and it's some of the first elements of prog metal that you hear on this disc. I never appreciated the percussion like I did this time around, though. There's some phenomenal drum fills, and again, the use of the cymbals on this track as well. It's really good. A short one, but a tight song that was, quite frankly, a Song of the Week candidate for me. Not the one I'm choosing, but it could have easily been a Song of the Week for me.
I think it's funny that you said this is more accessible. The under 4 minute track is more accessible than the 12-minute.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. The beginning, that bass line at the beginning of the song, it reminded me of like a dark version of Sweet Emotion by Aerosmith. Like it
Nice.
has that kind of same bass tone, but yet it's like this more kind of like doomy and dreary kind of vibe to it. But it kind of reminded me of that, and then the song would proceed to sound absolutely nothing like anything Aerosmith's ever done that I've heard.
I think Steven Tyler would not be as I don't know if he would agree with that, but yes, no. Obviously, this does not sound like anything that Aerosmith has done. But I appreciate what you're saying, just the way that the bass kind of just knocks this thing out of the park right at the beginning.
Yeah, and you even get some like harsher vocals towards the end of the song as well. Yeah, I agree with you. There's definitely some more metal elements, I think, that kind of shine through on this track than the previous one. I've always been kind of like borderline on whether I wanted to call this a prog rock or a prog metal band. There's definitely aspects of both, I think, throughout their career. Yeah, this is another good track. But I definitely agree with you that it definitely seems to have a different flavor than that first 12-minute, almost atmospheric, like epic. This one, yeah, definitely straightforward and easily the shortest track on the album.
Yeah. And then, again, I guess kind of taking the listener on that journey to continue, we start with this really weird sounds of people and laughter at the beginning of I Believe. And this one is a ballad with this really kind of repetitive guitar noodling, kind of like something Anathema, I think, would do, but a really beautiful tune. And I love the layered vocals during the chorus. To me, I think that just adds a completely new and interesting dimension to this particular song, and I think that's why it stands out to me. Love the acoustic guitar. It's fascinating that Marius Duda can play both the bass and then play in a beautiful acoustic guitar like this. But what I love about this song is just the emotional quality to it. And even though it's awfully repetitive, it's just so touching in many ways that it almost doesn't bother me. And I'm a fan of this one as well.
Yeah, it's very mellow. I mean, mellow in a different way than that first track was. In that, like, it's less. I don't know how to describe it. It's not as dark sounding. It's a little bit more of like a kind of like more traditional acoustic prog song. And it's just, I don't know, like really chill. Like I could see myself listening to this song like at a spa, like while I'm getting a massage or something. Like it's just really, really mellow and not, but not in like kind of a sad might not the word I'm looking for, but not in a dark way. It's a little bit more hopeful than I think the opening track was. But yeah, this is a solid little acoustic tune, and I think that it provides a little bit more of a different style than the previous two songs.
And I think that's needed, because I think that if it droned on, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but if it droned on akin to the first track, I think it would get old fast. And again, there's zigging and zagging here with Reality Dream, or we'll call it Reality Dream Part 1, the first instrumental tune on the album. Very, very heavy keyboards starting this thing out, but I've always thought this song gave me strong Porcupine Tree vibes. Really beautiful guitars that kind of just sing to you. And it's almost like that's taking the place of the lyrics and the vocals on this song. But definitely one of the proggier tunes on the album, both in terms of the melody and the tempo. And the bass lines really stand out on this one as well, just because they let the bass take lead, which is not something you often see with a lot of bands. I mean, sometimes you got to really listen for John Mayung on a Dream Theater album, but here you have no problem hearing that bass. Which is probably why I like to see them live, because that bass really kind of hits you, especially in a live setting. I mean, you can feel it.
Yeah, well said. I feel like the instruments really make it so that you're not missing the vocal aspect of the song. I think that the main guitar riff is really catchy. Like it's really memorable. That was one of the most memorable riffs on the album for me. For a fairly long instrumental song, it clocks in at over 6 minutes. I don't remember like missing the vocals or wanting the vocals to come back right away. It was just a really nice song, like a mid-tempo, again, like very atmospheric with like even though the guitars are electric, it doesn't feel very metally. It's definitely more of a prog rock, back to that prog rock kind of vibe, but just very chill. Not sure I'd want to hear this in a spa, but still, I like this one quite a bit as well.
And then, as we kind of get into the middle of this disc here, I know Loose Heart was the first song that I had ever heard from the band. It was, I think, the single for the album, if you will. And it's, to this day, one of the band's most memorable songs in their entire discography, at least for me. What did you think when you first heard it, and what did you think as you went back to it? Because I know that this was the one that you heard first as well.
It was definitely familiar to me. Like I remember as soon as I heard it, I was like, oh yeah. I remember this song. I'm pretty sure they played it when I saw them. The one time I saw them live. It's, I think, very similar to Reality Dream, just with vocals instead this time. It's kind of that same pace, same tempo, same level of gloominess to it.
Yep.
As a lot of these tracks tend to do, there's more. There tends to be a little bit more heaviness towards the back end of the song. It's almost like they're building up to it. And this one in particular ends in a really kind of grandiose way. But yeah, I like this one. Still, I I feel like I know it a little bit better now, but this was definitely the one I felt most familiar with on the entire album.
Yeah, I definitely have always been a really big fan of this song. There's something about it that just resonates with me, and for a long time it was my favorite. If anything, it probably got a little played out just because I loved it so much, and I would always just relish in it every time I heard it. Very lush sounding, just very, very a lot to pick up on. And one of the songs that every time you hear it, you can kind of pick out different things that you may not have heard in the past. But what I would say is that the vocals here, top notch, and it just drips with emotion. Like you can feel it with every single note and every single vocal line. And even though it's a relatively straightforward tune, there's just like lots to digest. And probably my favorite guitar solo on the entire album. And the way it ends is just really powerful. Always a fan of this track. Too easy to make it my song of the week, so I'm not going to choose it, but I certainly encourage people to listen to it if you've never heard it.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way. I was going to choose it, and then I thought I would maybe try to, be a little more daring. So, but yeah, go listen to it. If me and Justin end up choosing the same song of the week, then we'll post "Loose Heart" as kind of a runner-up track. How about
I like
that?
that. I like that a lot. And then we get to Reality Dream Part 2, the end of the Oreo cookie here with Reality Dream and Loose Heart. But Reality Dream Part 2, we've had bass solos kind of kick this thing off. We've had other tracks with the keyboards. Here, it's a drum solo that kind of starts this thing off with the weird phone dialing. It's almost like listening to a phone off the hook. It's really interesting sound effects. But this is another instrumental tune. I admittedly don't know the correlation or the connection between this and the first part or the third part, which would come later on. But it's a little less memorable, I think, than Reality Dream Part 1. There's a touch of jazziness to it in certain spots, which I think give it a little bit of a different feel. But at the same time, it seems to maintain the core Riverside sound. Interesting, but not my favorite track on the album. I'm curious to see your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's not as memorable as the first Reality Dream, but I also think that it kind of fits that, the fact that it has the same name, it kind of fits that vibe. It's another instrumental track. I think it's some similar tempo, similar vibe in general. It kind of like in the last few seconds, just all of a sudden goes into like this like prog keyboard solo. It's almost like they channeled their inner Dream Theater, like right at the very end of the song. But yeah, it's interesting because they, that's a grand total of about 11 minutes of instrumental tracks on this album, which, that makes up about a little bit more than a fifth of the album is these two instrumental tracks. But I think that they fit really nicely. I think that the fact that they weren't back to back was nice, that you didn't have this 11-minute break from vocals. I think putting Loose Heart in between the two Reality Dreams was a good move. And then, you have the rest of the album is all, songs with vocals. But yeah, this is cool. It's interesting because I feel like I'm looking at it from a different lens. Like instead of looking at it like, what do I want a band to do? It's like more looking in a more introspective way as to like, what did the band do here and why does it work? Like, I don't know. There's enough crap I can listen to that is wonderful for me, like the way that I want an album to be constructed, where I can go back to something like this and just appreciate it for what it is and be okay with two long instrumental tracks. Like, I don't know, I've changed a lot in how I look at things critically, because I just think there's enough other stuff out there that you don't need everything to just sound the same. It's okay for things to kind of have a different vibe to them, and I think that this works here. So
that's part of the reason that I think I've expanded my palette over the last 25 years, because I still love Halloween, but I can't listen to just Halloween and Freedom Call anymore. And similarly, I still love Dream Theater, and I obviously enjoyed the No Spoon album, but I can't listen to that all the time. So I find that when I listen to something like this, and then I contrast it with Exodus, and then I contrast it with Porcupine Tree. And then I contrast it with Creator. Like I just am all over the place, but that's what makes things really resonate, because when you listen to the same style over and over again, it starts to get a little old. And I think it also helps the Cream kind of rise to the top, if you will, to take a phrase out of the Macho Man's playbook, but the Cream rise to the top as the better albums in a genre are really what's going to stand out amongst the other, I don't want to say filler, but releases that maybe just are less memorable or less ear catching.
I think that's very well said. I really have you and my friend, our friend Caleb, to thank. Right around the same time, the two of you were kind of pushing me to expand my horizons, and I found like I was listening to bands like Riverside and Children of Bodom and stuff that like I never thought I would like. That all of a sudden I was like, oh, I'm kind of hearing this with new ears. And that continues even now. Just trying to be more open-minded and not, it's just funny because you think about like when we first started listening to things, we only had access to what we had on disc. And so like we were kind of confined to listen to our Halloweens and our Dream Theaters and our Sabotages and our Stradivariuses. And now it's like with Spotify and Bandcamp and iTunes, there's just such this endless supply of music. It's like going from one extreme to another. But you're right. Like, if I spent all my time trying to listen to Halloween clones, I'd be pretty bored. So, this is a good example of something that is it's just nice. I mean, this is one of our longer prog streaks, I feel like, with Riverside and No Spoon and Nevermore prior to that. And, if it wasn't for Slayer, we had Dream Theater the week before that. Slayer kind of broke things up a little bit, but, it's good. I need to get in touch with my prog side sometime. So this has been a good run of that.
Well, I can assure you that is coming to a close sooner rather than later with some of the stuff that at least I have on tap. But that being said, there's a lot of prog rock that we haven't touched, and even a lot of prog metal bands that I have on my list that we haven't gotten to. So we'll see what 2024 holds. But let's kind of get into this next one over here. Any thoughts on In Two Minds? This is kind of the back third of the disc, but a very interesting tune to me. But I want to hear your thoughts.
I really like this song. It's I think similar to I Believe in that it's kind of a pretty mellow acoustic guitar driven, not super dark. Just a really a nice song to listen to. It does have some electric guitar parts to it, but it is just like this really mellow tune with like these atmospheric like chimes and stuff. Like, again, we're going back to the spa, I think, with this one. Really solid tune. Probably one of my favorites on the album, actually.
Nice. I have to agree with you, and this was a pleasant surprise for me. Not that I forgot about the tune, but I don't know that I ever appreciated it as much as I did this week. This is a really underrated track. I don't ever hear people talk about it, but I'm not sure why. I think the acoustic guitar, which comes back all of a sudden, is just fantastic. And I think it's got one of the most beautiful choruses on the entire album, and that really sealed the deal for me. Very Porcupine Tree sounding in those instrumental sections. This could have easily been on their Stupid Dream album, which came out just a handful of years before this, before the Riverside release. Big fan of this track, so much so that I'm going to make it my song of the week. So let's give it a listen, and then we'll come back and kind of wrap up this album. This is Riverside's In Two Minds.
We used to like it used to be in the sunset time of our dream. For all these things we cannot change, we cannot be, we cannot stay. But if you lose
Yeah, so that is Into Minds, my song of the week. Did not expect that when we started the week, I'll be honest with you, but it came on really strong with each subsequent listen of this thing. And then we get to the last two tracks, the first of which is The Curtain Falls. This track is another one of the longer tracks on the disc, coming in at just under 8 minutes. And I think it was at this point that I kind of realized that I didn't know the back of this disc as much as I thought I kind of remembered it. But this song is a good one. It's just kind of buried in the back of this thing. The bass again is really kind of on full display with some great guitar solos that kind of blend into the chorus in many ways. The verses are a touch mundane to me, but certainly not bad. But it's actually well placed. I think this is the kind of track that feels just about right as like the penultimate track on the album. And then one of the things that really stood out to me was about 6 minutes in, there's this really guitar-driven, heavy passage that gave me Evergrey vibes, which I thought was really, really interesting, considering the two bands probably could not sound any more different. But all of a sudden, the song kind of reverts out of Evergrey and goes back into Riverside. It was just a cool little anecdote that I noticed on this one. Any thoughts on The Curtain Falls?
Yeah, I decided to make this my song of the week for no other reason but that I feel like it kind of represents all the different types of sounds that Riverside made on this album all in one song. Like it starts out really just chill and mellow, just that bass line kind of leading the way. The haunting vocals, and then like you said, it kind of builds and builds and builds. It starts to get heavy, close to the 6 minute mark, just heavy guitars and keys. There's not really a ton of vocals on this, which is why it's a little surprising that I liked it so much. But I just thought this was such an interesting song, and really was almost like a Riverside's greatest hits kind of rolled into one 8 minute song. This has a little bit of everything.
I like that comparison. I was not expecting you to say that. I certainly wasn't expecting you to choose it. But now that you mention it, you're spot on. This is like you get the full palette in about 8 minutes. So it's I think every other song to this point is leading up to a track like this, where you kind of get the sampler platter.
Yeah, I think my only criticism would be like I wish there was a little bit more vocals to it, because like literally the vocals kind of bow out about 3 minutes into the song, or maybe a little bit further in, but it's mostly an instrumental track. There are some vocals, but I just thought it really kind of just wrapped up like the whole album kind of nicely into an 8 minute package. So I thought rather than go the obvious route, I would choose something a little bit different. So let's give it a listen. No idea what minute I'll pick, but here's The Curtain Falls from Riverside's Out of Myself album, celebrating 20-year anniversary.
That was very foolish of me. I can't do nothing now. The light shines in the darkness. I don't wanna go. Oh, wish I could turn that time. Oh my God, you're an angel. Take me away from here. I think I'm ready now, but still can't make up my mind.
Interesting selection. I'm happy you went in that direction. And then all of a sudden the track, or I should say the album, ends with the song "Okay." And this is a really peculiar ending to this album. I totally forgot about this track. And it's a really slow ballad like song at the end. it reminds you of like a smoke, or at least it reminds me of a smoky jazz lounge. And I'll be honest with you, and you may think I'm nuts. Slow Love Slow by Nightwish. That's what I was feeling when I heard this. Very interesting way to go out. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts.
I was literally going to mention that exact song, to be honest with you.
Wow. All right.
Because I think we had the exact same conversation about that song when we talked about the Imaginarium album. And yeah, it's that same kind of vibe. Sitting on a stool, maybe with a lit cigarette, just like a guy with a stand-up bass. You could just picture it. It's that kind of vibe. Interesting way to close things out. It's arguably the most like chill song on a very chill album overall. But yeah, interesting way to go out. But kind of cool. Like I like that it kind of sticks out. The jazziness of it, I think, and the bluesiness of it kind of sticks out and makes it feel different than the other songs on the album, but while still maintaining that kind of Riverside, that Riverside sound.
So, having gone back to this scale of 1 to 10, what are you rating Riverside's debut?
I'm going to give it a 7.25. I thought it was a above average, really solid listen. The one thing was like to me that there wasn't really one song that really stuck out to me that really kind of pushed the score higher, kind of pushing it towards that 8. I just thought it was a very solid, like, it was like pretty much like a 7.25 straight across from start to finish. Not a bad song, but I also not sure I really thought there was any like out of this world songs either. Just really solid. I liked it a lot, and would have shocked my younger self that I rated it as high as it is. But I will say I didn't listen to their second to most recent album as much as I probably should have, but the one prior to that and the most recent one, I like those albums both a lot, and I would probably rank both of them a bit higher than this one. So that's kind of where I'm at. Curious to see where you're at.
I am at a 7.75. I thought this was a really good album. I don't know if I can put it in that rarefied air of other bands that are 8.5 or a 9, but it's a really good album, and it's something that I should have gone back to a lot earlier because I love this album 20 years ago. So I'm glad that we went back there, and it kind of renewed my interest in the band in many ways. And now I have to go back and play all their other albums, of which they have quite a few at this point, including the new one. I have to give that another spin. I don't know that I liked it as much as you did, but it was certainly in and around my top 50. Whether it stays there, I think remains to be seen. But really, really interesting release from a band that at the time really didn't sound much like anybody else, other than glimpses of some other bands. But glad we covered it.
Since Knops didn't send us a soliloquy about this album to kind of cap things off, I'll just stick to Wikipedia on this one because I kind of like how the description was, and I thought it makes for a good kind of final description of the album on a whole. But it says, Out of Myself has been described as an emotional musical journey, powerful in a subtle way, with slight elements of metal, arena rock, grunge, and even dub. At the same time, the album has been termed the band's gentle first outing. Built on the strength of Marius Duda's bass guitar, the music also relies on a soaring atmosphere of Jacek Melnicki's keyboards and long, weeping, long-stretched high guitar notes of Peter Grzinski's lead guitar. So I thought that was a nice little summation of this album, and the grunge and the dub is kind of interesting. I don't know that I heard much grunge, but the dub I definitely can see.
What is dub?
It's like it's kind of like a type of club like music. Like I don't know that I could explain it exactly. Might have to go to Wikipedia for that as well. But I don't know that I picked up any grunge. There was definitely like a darkness to a lot of it. And just to answer your question, dub is an electronic music style that grew out of reggae in the late 60s and early 70s, which I think kind of makes sense in this case. The grunge, not really seeing. It's kind of funny because the guys from No Spoon had mentioned that they felt like there was a little bit of grunge on their album, and Van and Jeff from Nevermore also kind of talked about grunge being a part of Nevermore. So
yeah,
interesting.
we're on a. I mean, if we don't pick Nirvana next week, I think it's a missed opportunity. But very interesting, very interesting.
Yeah. So that's that is interesting for sure. But yeah, maybe if one of the guys from Riverside wants to come on the podcast and let us know if they think there's any grunginess going on here. But anybody else out there who begs to differ, please let us know. So yeah, that was Riverside.
I like it. Shall we talk some news? Lacuna Coil out of Italy, another band we have not yet talked about, has announced a short run of U.S. shows for this May, starting out in Wilmington, Delaware on May the 2nd, and then culminating with their performance at the Milwaukee Metal Fest on May 19th. A band that I've seen live, ironically, Within Temptation opening for them. But Lacuna Coil doing a U.S. tour, always nice to see when bands come over. And then, I don't know if you heard about this, but did you hear about Metallica doing a For Whom the Band Tolls marching band competition?
No.
Do you know anything about this?
No, I felt like I would have remembered that.
So they're giving out like large sums of money for like $75,000 for the winner of the Division I competition. And at this point, the following 5 finalists have been chosen: Auburn, Fresno State, Iowa State, University of Iowa, and University of Texas at Austin. And then not only are they doing it at like the Division I and Division II and Division III college levels, but they're also doing it with high schools, including the medium high schools. And you'll never guess this, but Malvern High School in Malvern, New York is one of the finalists. So kudos to them. I just found this whole thing completely fascinating. For Whom the Band Tolls.
Very interesting. I feel like if Nick and Ryan knew about this, 23 years ago, could have
New Hyde Park would have been up there.
It would have been a New Hyde Park Memorial finalist. I wanted to piggyback on the Lacuna Coil tour.
Sure.
I wanted to mention that Oceans of Slumber is
Yes.
opening on this tour, and I think that's awesome that they are going to get some exposure playing with Lacuna Coil. Also, a band that I'm not familiar with called New Year's Day is also going to be on that tour. But I was really kind of surprised to see Oceans of Slumber on there, not because they don't deserve to be, but just because I didn't know that they would have been on Lacuna Coil's radar. But that's awesome, and I'm glad to see that.
They may have the same booking manager, but even still, it's an interesting package. And I don't think they sound much alike, but at the same time, I can understand why the appeal of one, especially the gothic tinge that Lacuna Coil has, and how it kind of blends with some of the vocal stylings of Cammy and Oceans of Slumber. So cool tour. I kind of wish they were coming nearby, but alas, this one is not meant to be. But one other note that I wanted to mention, Marty Friedman, formerly obviously of Megadeth fame, is nearly done recording his new solo album. So I think that's something that we'll have a chance to hear next year. I had the pleasure of seeing Marty Friedman live opening for Queensryche a few months ago, and the guy is just a phenomenal guitar player. And obviously he's doing something a little different than the whole thrash thing, but you want to talk about great guitar players, and obviously we just spoke to one of them in Jeff Loomis, but an all-time great. But Marty Friedman, arguably playing on the best thrash disc of all time with Rust in Peace. I mean, just an absolute talent. So I'm going to be curious to check out his solo album when it comes out in the not so distant future.
Any relation to Maxwell Jacob?
That is something I would like to see, and yes, they are brothers. Oh. But I digress. What are we listening to next week, my friend?
Well, I know everyone's probably getting a little nervous that we're running out of time with the year and we haven't done our annual Sabotage episode. Well, don't worry. We may have skipped our annual Fates Warning episode this year, but Sabotage we shall not be skipping. This was an album that I was pretty much 50-50 on when I chose Streets. This was kind of my the other one I was toying with, and I believe it was our friend Brian Clough who was like, "Hey, you guys have done 2 Zach albums. What gives?" So, I went with Streets, but this time to even the odds at 2 and 2, we're gonna do another John album, and this time we're gonna go with my other favorite John album, and that's Gutter Ballet from 1989. So
I can't believe we haven't done this yet.
I know this was, I think, probably the third metal record I ever owned, after Handful of Rain and Triumph of Steel from Manowar. I remember my cousin took me to the mall on my birthday, and she said pick a CD, and I literally had Handful of Rain in one hand and Gutter Ballet in the other, and it was like I literally knew one song from each album. I knew Chance from Handful of Rain, I knew Gutter Ballet from Gutter Ballet, thanks to Ralph's vaunted mixtape, which, by the way, we did a bonus episode with Ralph discussing that whole tape, and that's in our Patreon archives. We'll probably release that to the general public sometime in the future, but that was a bonus for our Patreon subscribers. But I remember Chance just won out, probably because it was like a little bit more modern. It sounded newer, but literally, it took me 2 more trips to buying a CD that I went back and bought Gutter Ballet, and I would eventually go on to buy every other Sabotage album. I'd have to stop and think about what the third one was, but I definitely remember that Handful of Rain and Gutter Ballet were the first 2. Streets probably was the third in retrospect, but this is one of my favorites that pretty much leaves, I think, Wake of Magellan as my last favorite Sabotage, like top tier Sabotage album that we haven't talked about yet. But I definitely would like to talk about all the albums at some point in time. But this one is very special to me, and I think like a really interesting time in the band's history. And I think there's just a lot to talk about here, and it's kind of cool because the first time we did a Sabotage album, it was released on Christmas Day, and this one will be no different. We will drop it on Christmas morning at 6:00. As we joked, it won't be Dream Theater's Awake album since we did that already. So 6:00 on a Christmas morning, Gutter Ballet.
Good choice, my friend. I always love talking Sabotage, and just like every album from that band, they're so different from one another, and they have such a different feel. And the word I always use is transitional, but they all are transitional in their own way, and Gutter Ballet is no different. So that will certainly be fun. And then we'll have our requests to take us into the new year, and we have our first request for January lined up, and it's another one. I'll just give a little hint. It's a band we have not covered, and I think that it's probably about time because they are a stalwart, to say the least. I'll drop that little nugget. Is a band that everyone knows and would probably be surprised to hear that 180 plus episodes in that we've not yet covered this band. So that and more on the horizon. If you like what you hear, please give us a like and a follow. Consider joining our Patreon. The links are below. Tell a friend. That works just the same. But we appreciate your support, and we will come back to you Christmas morning with some Sabotage. Enjoy, my friend. It's been a hell of a month, and it's only getting better.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like every night I'm looking at your face, and
I am so sorry.
Well, to be fair, the thumbnail is very small. So.
Very good. Enjoy, buddy. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Don't let me fall.